Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you tonight to the Institut Français. I am Isabelle Mancy, cultural attachée at the Institut Français du Royaume-Uni. I would like to extend my warmest welcome to the friends and partners of Diaphonique and to all of those who have gathered here tonight on this spatial panel bringing together laureates of Diaphonique, our Franco-British fan for classical contemporary music. Since 2010, when Diaphonique Public-Private Fund was set up by the Institut Français, creation has been at the heart of the music collaborations supported by Diaphonique between France and the United Kingdom. Once a year, a Diaphonique call for new music projects opens from mid-March till mid-May in order to promote the very best of contemporary musical creation between our two countries. For more than a year now, we have been expanding Diaphonique to include the panel discussions about societal issues related to music. Previously, the place of women in contemporary music creation, as in Women Set the Tone, and today, the value of innovation for composers, musicians, and the music industry. But above all, I would like to thank one of our past jury members for accepting to moderate today's discussion. I'm delighted to welcome Graham McKenzie, director of the Huddersfield Contemporary Music Festival, who will be in conversation with Lore Lixenberg, Solen Fluzin, and Pascal Savy. I'm very happy to welcome Lore Lixenberg, mezzo-soprano and experimental singer, a 2021 Diaphonique laureate with York University, Solen Fluzin, French curator and co-founder of Anam, Cara, who managed the Musicity at Home project supported by Diaphonique in 2020. French electronic composer and performer Pascal Savy will be joining them to talk about his practice, and introduce the new music program he created at the Institute with the violinist Diane Eidenbohm and cellist Timothy Budball. After the panel discussion and after a short break, the concert will start at 7:30. In the name of the composers, musicians, and ensembles from our two countries, we would like to thank the SACEM, Centre National de la Musique, British Council, Institut Français, Creative Scotland, Fondation Francis and Mika Salabert for the lasting support. We are grateful to the French Institute Trust, to all our private donors, past and present, particularly Aline Forial d'Estezet, whose commitment has enabled Diaphonique to support cutting-edge projects. I would like to add my special thanks to the teams of the Institute for organizing this event tonight. It is a pleasure to have you with us today. I will not go any further and leave you the stage. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Yeah, cool. My name's Graham McKenzie, as has been said, and I am very delighted to have been asked to moderate this panel discussion. I very much enjoyed being part of the development of Diaphonique in its early days of its creation, and was pleased to be able to assist that way in the development of many great projects between French and UK-based artists, ensembles, festivals, composers, and I enjoyed my time in that jury very much. When I'm not sitting in juries, I am the artistic director of this festival, Huddersfield Contemporary Music Festival, which rather conveniently starts on the 18th of November. But this isn't a plug, because it's completely sold out, so if you don't have a ticket, don't come. But it's a public service announcement, because you can hear the highlights from the festival throughout December on BBC Radio 3. So that's why I'm waving it in front of you, so that you can do that. Tonight we're going to talk about the Diaphonique projects that Solen and Lore have been involved in, or are involved in, and we're going to talk to Pascal about his practice as well, and find out a little bit about the concert later tonight. We're going to hear and see some clips and some excerpts, which will then lead us on to some wider conversations. I'm just going to say a little bit, just briefly, about the panellists have been introduced, but I'm just going to say anyway that at the far end, Lore Lixenberg, who's a British mezzo-soprano, active in contemporary and experimental music. But I felt the need to introduce her again because I saw a description, and I can't remember where, Lore, but it called you an experimental atomic post-cyborg voice and opera maker, which I think is a really great description. I would love to be one of them. Afterwards you can tell me how you become a post-cyborg anything.
You're totally post-cyborg, Graham. You have no need to fear. You're the most post-cyborg person I've ever met.
Oh, thank you. That makes me feel so much better.
I thought you might.
So much better. And on my right, Solen Fluzin, who has trained in both architecture and classical music. She has led many R&D projects in site-specific sound art and participatory urban planning and environmental engineering. As part of Music City, which we're going to hear about, Solen is a skillful and imaginative project manager who has built on Music City's creative identity to manage a vibrant programme while building a sustainable business model. So all of that sounds very fantastic. Well done.
Trying really hard.
And last but not least, Pascal Savy, who is a French electronic music composer and performer whose work is at the intersection of drone, noise and ambient. And I'm very much looking forward to the concert later, which you're going to tell us a little about, which puts you in a different setting. And you told me earlier, it put you out your comfort zone. So Absolutely. I always like musicians to be out their comfort zone.
Absolutely.
That works very, very well for me and for the audiences, I feel, as well. So we're going to start with hearing a little bit about the Diaphonique projects. But that's going to take us into wider conversation on some subjects which I think are particularly relevant, particularly timely, as we've come out a very strange last 20 months or so with the pandemic. I kind of resist saying post-COVID because I think when you, particularly in the UK, I don't think we're post-COVID anything yet. But things are starting to open up. Concert life is beginning to return. Cultural life is beginning to return. We're gathered here in a room to talk about culture and music, and that feels very, very good after the last 20 months. So there's some important things, I think, to get people's thoughts and views on. I think we're a small enough group as well that if people have questions along the way, we're not going to wait till the end and do okay, now are there any questions? Because that can get terribly frustrating because people do that and then there's no time really to ask questions. So if you have a question then or a view on some of the subjects we're talking about, then kind of wave your hand in my direction, and then we can take that question. And if I think you're dominating the discussion, then of course I'll just completely ignore you after a while. So that's the advantage of being the moderator. You get to decide. So we're going to start, I think, with Solen and your Diaphonique project, Music City. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the project and then wave to our friend at the back when you want him to show the video?
Yes, of course. So tonight I'm here with you to speak a little bit more about a project that's really dear to my heart. It is the most ambitious project I've co-curated and produced in the past year, and it was laureate of Diaphonique 2020, and Anna told me it was the only project effectively maintained throughout the pandemic. So that's a big achievement, and it was a source of a lot of learning for me. So Musicity at Home was a project encompassing new music commissions from French artists based in the UK, a series of music workshops for artists to develop pieces involving the audience a little bit, and a premiere of all these new pieces commissioned. And initially, when we planned it, when we applied to Diaphonique, when we received the happy news of our grant, we relied on a lot of things we took for granted, and which we might touch on a little bit tonight, which were international travels, in-person events as part of a big festival, and also initially a quite homogeneous curation of music genre and artists. And when we were meant to start working on this project in April 2020, this is where the first lockdown happened, and that just changed everything. And Diaphonique support was instrumental because they were the first partners we were able to come back to and tell, we want to try doing this anyway. Could you follow us? And they said yes. We had to rework many aspects of that project, obviously, but we maintained almost every aspect and try and translate it as best as we could online. And for us, the main takeout of this period of work and all of the support we received was the importance of maintaining connection through this time. It involved being even more ambitious with connections, effectively involving more artists. Initially, we were going to work with 3 French artists. We ended up expanding to 11 artists and doing a mix of French, English, mostly London-based artists, involving a wider musical and personal background for these artists, doing a program that could appeal to a larger audience, while also still being, very aware of the need for quality at that time, and involving more partners and more spaces, and shining a light on spaces which were left empty, spaces of performance, and going outdoor as well was a big interest in that project. So we have a little video to show you, which is a series of snippets of this performance we captured, and tiny little bits from the artist telling us what was the main takeout for us. So I think we can go ahead if you'd like to launch it. Thank you.
I felt quite detached from the rest of the world, and suddenly I could connect with something that's very, very close to me.
For my life, space and sound is actually really connected. So music is for me to change the perspective.
Music is a spiritual plane.
Long story short, but we don't play too much since 4 or 5 months, so that's just great to just come back.
Now the debris settle from the blast of rage. Body built back from a shriveling ash. Now the black gold gilded the lonesome grey.
I've created a space that I'm putting into someone else's room, and that's been quite an interesting change in thinking about my music.
it's a gift to being able to express myself as an artist. Through the trees.
Long been hearing the river is near. It's not only about the physical space, it's about the people that are there. It's about the story that that physical space has. It's about the connection, the feelings, and the senses. We get to feel love, and to wait.
Of the London Festival of Architecture and Make Music Day, and the guys wanted me to express their thanks to Team London Bridge, Diaphonique, Franco-British Fund for Contemporary Music, Arts Council England and the Emergency Response Fund, Institut Français, Bureau Export, Albany Theatre Deptford and London Bridge City. For more info,
So this is it. This is a tiny, tiny fraction of the 7 hours of performances that we filmed and showed as part of the London Festival of Architecture back in June 2020, and on the day of Make Music Day, Festival de la Musique. I wonder if I should just hand back over to you, Graham, to talk about what we've just seen, and if you have any pressing questions.
I think my first question really is, given that you were about to embark on Music City, and then there was lockdown, what sort of lead-in time did you have to kind of change it in part to an online project and to change, things about it? What sort of lead-in time, and what were the challenges of that? What were the most challenging things?
I mean, the challenges were multiple. I'm sure everyone who's tried to create during that time will agree that it was very difficult to even start thinking about what could be possible, because the whole discussion was about what wasn't possible, right? So for us, the main thing that enabled us to keep going forward were discussions with our partners and involving the artists much more. And I'm once again extremely grateful to Anna and Diaphonique for allowing us to discuss these problems together. And if anything, we started by rebuilding trust between all the actors of the project, and truly this is what enabled us to overcome any other kind of barriers we had to face, such as the big initial shock, of course, at the very beginning of the project. And then the time frame of 7 weeks to be able to reassure everyone and regain all supports and make sure the project would be able to reach an audience and make sure all the artists were okay and safe and happy to be still part of that project. It was a lot to take on, and especially the video production was a big part of it that we hadn't planned, obviously, because it was meant to happen in person. And the streaming, there was a huge technical learning curve, and at the time, there hadn't been much done yet. So we tried a lot of different things, which we felt like might have been done a little better a few months after. But we didn't. Yeah, we tried not to be led by fear and purely try and take all the beautiful things of that project that we believed in and carry them throughout this time.
Were there any things that you then couldn't do that you'd planned to do, that you just couldn't make that transfer to a digital experience?
That's a very good question. I guess the biggest unknown for us was something that you're very interested in as well, which was the audience engagement. How do you maintain all the various different ways that the audience can usually engage with music when they are able to go and view it in person and meet the artist and exchange with other people attending the event. And we tried replacing this in many different ways online, by creating space for workshop where we engage the audience a little more, to effectively participate in creating the pieces and responding to each artist's practices. We also tried to make space for discussions, but it wasn't quite easy to know what audience members were thinking, except for like the returning audience, which we knew how to reach more deeply, and we're able to gather like really qualitative feedback from them and get a good idea of how they perceive the event. But we reached something like 2,000 people over that project's duration, so it wasn't possible for us to be able to connect with all of these different people and get a good idea of how they perceived it. So yeah, a lot of unknown on the audience engagement side, which we haven't necessarily resolved, and to this day.
It's interesting. I think often that, when people talk about digital and online concerts or online presentations, and I'm interested to know what everyone thinks of that. I hear a lot about the advantages. One of the advantages being put forward is the reach, and is that wider engagement. Being a Scot, I'm naturally a cynic anyway, but I find myself quite cynical about that, because I think in essence you've got no way of knowing what engagement is. It's not a word that I'm very sceptical about when it comes to it, because I think when someone leaves their house and they travel and they sit in a space for an hour or longer and they engage or they listen and they watch a cultural event, you have some sense or idea of how, to what extent that audience is engaged. When you're looking at numbers along the bottom of a screen and the number of clicks or the number of people supposedly watching, I wonder how you assess the engagement, because they might be washing their socks and they forgot to switch it off. I don't know. So that question of engagement, and the reason I'm asking this is I think we'll come on in a minute to talk about digital as something here to stay or not, and the pros and cons of that. But yeah, this sense of engagement, and that's a question to all of you actually, is how do you assess that, and particularly as an artist?
I think there's a kind of obsession with quantity of engagement and not quality of engagement. And, this kind of fetishization of big audience, whereas in fact, maybe it's better to have a small audience who really connect with what you do, or at least try to. There is a place for online, there's no question about that. And the whole digital world, the whole digital realm. However, we can't escape the fact that we are bones and blood and flesh. Because I was trying to learn a bit about online virtual reality during the lockdown, and you just can't get away from it. It's just not. Maybe one day they'll be able to make holograms of people, but it's still not the same. It's kind of that there's something happens when you're physically in a room, and I agree. There's the whole activity surrounding it as well. So yeah, that's what I think.
Okay, Pascal.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and actually, I may have an answer on my very small scale of experience, as I'll talk about later. I'm quite involved with that venue in London called Eclectic. And then when the lockdown happened, actually I know them very well, so part of the discussion what they're going to do, and they decided to go completely virtual and organize those online performances very often. But what happened, they did it through YouTube and Twitch, but I think on YouTube, that's where we saw the most people. And you see those numbers you were talking about, and they don't mean anything. But what they decided to do is to open the live chat next to the screen. And what happened, I started to see all my friends from the scene appearing in there. And then we would have those chats in between performances. And I remember clearly one evening, this sense of isolation, like I haven't seen all of them for a very long time. But then suddenly in that chat, like the old banter was coming back and then talking about the performances, and then they made sure they structured the online gig as a normal gig with some intervals and pauses and things like that. So there was this sense of community still happening somehow. But that's very local, and that's what I like about Eclectic. It's a local community.
Yeah, yeah. I think, you know, at Huddersfield Contemporary Music Festival, we had to go online quite short notice last year as well. And because we tend to have a big international programme, actually I had to very quickly scrap 2 years' work and then in sort of 4 weeks put together another programme, which was fine. The one thing that was interesting though is that I suppose that when things are online, they tend to be online for a period of time, and you can watch it when you want to watch it. At Huddersfield, we didn't do that. I very much wanted to create still the sense that you had to commit to a certain time, and that people had to watch it as a communal experience. So the motto was, when it's gone, really. When it's on, and when it's gone, it's gone. So if you wanted to see that performance, you had to tune in at 7 o'clock on the Saturday night. And then there was a break where you could talk to your friends online who'd hopefully seen the project, and as you would do if you were in the hall. Most of my staff, who are much younger and much more online savvy than me, thought I was crazy to do it that way. And it was also interesting. I had a couple of journalists who called me and said, well, I can't watch it at 7 o'clock on the Saturday night. Can you send me the video? And I said, well, no, because I couldn't send you if it was going to be in the hall, I couldn't send you the hall. So it's about your commitment, So again, they thought I was a little crazy, thinking, you turned down a review and such. But I just felt it was important to me to try and get that sense of communal listening experience, that people did tune in at the exact time,
We actually did the same thing as well, just to create the sense of excitement and making people feel as if, they had to commit. Because as Graham was saying, listening things online or just playing things in the background, you don't have the same level of attention and interaction with the work. And so we did the exact same thing. The performance were limited to that one time, going through all day, going through for 7 hours. So people still had the opportunity to tune in at any time. And we had published a lineup previously, just like you would on the day itself of the festival. And once it was done, it was done. Only the artists were able to access the recording afterwards, but nobody else. And that was part of the magic, I think.
Yeah, we did show in January. We done a rewind and we put it up on YouTube channel for 12 hours, some of the works, just so that people in other territories, other parts of the world could watch it, because obviously, the time differences. One other thing I wanted to ask you about, whether you had any concerns about moving online, was in relation to production values, which is another kind of bugbear of mine, in the sense that I think that, another problem I have with digital a little bit is I think it creates an inequality, because as a small organisation, there's no way we could afford to have the same production values as the National Theatre, who put something online, or the Royal Opera House, who are spending thousands on that production, being filmed professionally, and I've got someone in the kitchen with their cello and an iPhone. So I kind of worry about that inequality, which doesn't exist again in real life, because you can get around that, I think, by the quality of the curation, the experience that you put in front of people in a space. So did you have any concerns about the production values when you moved online?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, and you can tell from the videos, they're quite different in colors, and that's the part of the project's production that wasn't entirely taken into account in the budget, for example. Video production consumes many hours and can cost exponential costs. And I was lucky to have direct support at home. My partner in crime is right here, and he was the one being able to help us with this. And something else which we tried helping with, and which wasn't necessarily part of our skill set initially, was to help artists becoming more comfortable with that way of working. And that included doing a lot of research on what was being done, on what was available, quite low-tech ways of producing quality content, and making sure, we had discussed this with the artists before even trying to record anything together. Making sure that was something that wouldn't add to the stress of the time. And you can see it involved us traveling to artists within London, because we had to slightly rework our curation to work with London-based artists only, just so that we could support them more closely, including capturing their performance. And I think, as you said, it does create inequalities, because smaller entities which don't necessarily have the skill sets and talents at home just find themselves left behind. And for me, this just calls on maybe a greater mutualizations of resources and skills within our industries, where basically, everything that's needed for things to continue could be pooled together and just mutualized between artists and organizations to make sure that everyone has access to the means of producing great content to value their work.
Yeah. One other thing that I wanted to touch on around digital while we're in that subject, because I think that there's also some implications for the and very, very current with COP26, of course, just about to open in my hometown in Glasgow. Because there's a growing pressure, I think, on the music industry in particular around sustainability and environmental issues. Particularly in relation to things like touring and travelling and crossing borders. And I heard a politician on Radio 4 the other day, a cabinet minister, saying that musicians should really think about whether that tour is necessary or not before they take it because of sustainability issues. I've yet to hear a politician say that executive from JP Morgan should think about whether they really need to get on a flight and fly to the other side of the world to exchange a contract or sack the workforce or whatever these executives do. And it seems to me, they're kind of pushing it an open door with artists, because as a sector, there's no doubt that artists want to do the right thing. They want to contribute in a positive way to the climate issues that we're facing. So we're hearing a lot at the moment about hybrid. A lot of funding applications around the arts talk about you can have a hybrid project, which is partly online and partly a live experience. And we hear about a lot of this chat about the travel. And I think in a way there's a bit of a naive dialogue opening up, I think, which in the sector, in the arts, which says travel bad, digital good. That confuses me. Let me just read a couple of quotes from reports that came out pre-pandemic. So in 2019, an organisation called Reset.org, which was founded by a German couple, whose role is to find ways to encourage high-tech companies to be more sustainable. So Reset.org brought out this report in December 2019. So that was before the pandemic and before we've all spent most of our lives in the last 20 months online. And they said the use of digital technology now actually causes more CO2 emissions and has a bigger impact on global warming than the entire aviation industry. So that's interesting. So that confuses me, but it's interesting. And then the other thing that I came across was a report which has actually come out in 2015, and it was a joint report research by University of Glasgow and University of Oslo. And they found that streaming music does far more damage to the environment than producing vinyl records and CDs and disposing of those records and CDs. So I guess my question, and my question to everyone in the panel really, is this idea of digital somehow being better for the environment, to get your thoughts on that. And my concerns, and whether you share those concerns, that in trying to do the right thing, we're in danger, particularly of festivals like mine, are now starting to think about, well, we're still going to fly a certain amount of artists in, and we're going to stream the concert as well, in which case we're going to double the problem by thinking that our intentions are good and actually we're helping the situation. So just a response from any of you to that aspect of digital.
I mean, I have some thoughts, but I've been talking a lot, so I'm wondering if any of you two would like to respond to that first.
No, I think share your thoughts.
All right. Well, so for me, coming from initially a quite technical background of architecture and engineering, I think the only way forward for the music industry to truly act on these topics is to cooperate with actual environmental experts. Because I think otherwise we can talk a lot about it, but without, as you said, some clear research in impact, but also some guidance on actions to take that would truly not only mitigate, but just like reduce emissions are needed. And it's something I haven't seen many leaders in the music industry challenge, once again with like clear action plans. I mean, very recently, I've heard of, you know, like larger bands making very strong statements of not touring anymore. But for musicians, that's maybe something we'll extend to you too. Touring is essential for creating an income, and major bands can make these statements because they can, you know, they can just balance it, and they don't need to reach as much of an audience anymore. But for artists, and you two are quite established, but also for younger artists, you're making a name by showing yourself places, and touring is a big part of this. Yeah, just the way forward is cooperating with actual environmental experts to put together planned actions, and also in cooperations with musicians, including the youngest musicians, onto what would allow them to like have a less negative impact on the environment, but at the same time guarantee some kind of living. So if you'd like to talk about your own experience in that regard.
Not necessarily about my own experience, but first of all, reacting what you said, Graham, about organizing a festival and not flying all your artists, but it's also the footprint of all those people, the audience traveling to your site of action. And actually, I saw something interesting a couple of years ago. I've been following the Anam Festival in Krakow for a long time, and they really try to think forward about all those things. And then in a newsletter, the curator, director was actually asking his following, like, would you be happy to try to organize traveling from main stations in Europe to Krakow by bus, by train, try to reduce the environmental impact on all this traveling. If you've got like 2,000 or 3,000 of people flying to Krakow, it adds a lot because not everybody arrives at the same time. So he was trying to see if there was an interest into changing our ways of approaching traveling as well as an audience. And I found it very interesting. And I think the responsibility falls into also all the individuals and trying to raise awareness about those impacts as artists or festival organizers is very important.
Yeah. Lore, your thoughts?
Just to go back to the one of the quotes you had about the environmental impact of digital as opposed to analog. I heard or saw, I don't know if it's true in this post-truth society, who knows what is truth and what isn't, but I saw a statistic which is for a conference where people go and stay in the hotel, and where the enormous, I mean, we're talking big conference where they're all online, actually the footprint of the online conference is bigger than people actually going to the conference, probably by train and such. Because people seem to think that because something is on the cloud, that it is actually a cloud, but actually the cloud is a big set of machines in a physical place, producing a lot of CO2 emissions. So it's not without a price. It's everything has a price. And in terms of the flying, well, the problem isn't the flying, it's the fuel. I mean, you know, there's going to be plenty of alternatives to these quite CO2 heavy fuels. So I think that. And yes, I mean, I've been traveling personally a lot by train, very little by plane. Certainly on the mainland, just scooting between countries by train. It's really nice. Actually, it's a really nice way to travel. I prefer it, and I think it's solvable. And I think that this mythology that online is somehow less CO2 heavy needs to be somehow eradicated. But that's up to a PR firm.
Yeah, just to say. That, of course, the ahead of COP26, the UK government have just made it cheaper to fly domestically, while hiking up rail fares to their highest annual increase for many years. Just one other point, then I'll bring you in, is that to say two things. One, festivals or arts organisations that are core funded by Arts Council of England, as part of our core funding agreement, we have to do two things now. We have to have an environmental and sustainability plan, and I have to have a plan to increase my digital offer. I just put out there and ask, are these two things sustainable, or are they contradictory, or whatever? The other question about travel, I was doing a talk a couple of years ago for Julie's Bicycle, who are an organisation who advise the arts sector on environmental issues and sustainability. And on that, and they have a manifesto, and that includes, bringing people by means other than air travel. So before I gave the talk, I costed the festival from the year before, to look at what would have cost us to bring those artists by means other than rail travel. And the additional cost to bring people to Huddersfield by other means was £31,000. Not 31,000 in total for the travel cost, but it would have cost me £31,000 more to bring people by other means. So while we want to do the right thing, that of course, and I know this is going to, it's been recorded and will be broadcast at some point. So if anyone out there from funding bodies is listening, that's the sort of financial support required for us to make that change. And one other last thing, many years ago in Huddersfield, the strangest request I ever got was from an artist, a vocalist, who was in deepest part of Russia. And when the rider comes through, the only way he would travel is by horse. And my poor festival manager did try and work out how many horses it would take to get them from Russia to Huddersfield. And we gave up because we figured it wasn't just the cost, but we'd probably kill so many poor horses en route trying to get them there. So there's two questions. The gentleman in the cap.
Not so much a question, but I think we can acknowledge that digital technology will advance and become more sophisticated, more like real. But the real space that I just concur with you is so important for mental health, society and social interaction. That argument that isn't often put across strong enough with evidence to counter what is in effect, I increasingly see the environmental arguments as a religious cult, which, if you question it, you are in a dodgy place often. So the only way forward is to provide argument and evidence to counteract the obsessiveness of environmental and sustainable measures.
Yeah, thank you for those thoughts. And there's a question there.
Yeah, sadly it's not as, it's really, was the artist Ayaan Ulsan, the throat singer?
No, it wasn't. Yeah, one last question to Solen, and then we must move on and hear Laurie's project. One last question to Solen from me was, because we started talking about adaptability and going online, yeah, and you had to then respond. Was that empowering? Do you feel that was an empowering experience now? Because we all worry in the arts about, what if something goes wrong? We've got an event coming up. What if it goes wrong? But hey, you know, you've probably now dealt with one of the biggest changes that could happen suddenly. Is it an empowering experience?
Yeah. I mean, it was certainly full of so many unknown, but once again, for me, just being able to be more open and ask for help made it all possible. And I mean, at the time, as like purely project management interest, I was following a study called Fail Space, which is an AHRC funded project that looks at failures as a possible creative input in projects and how to handle failures in a more nuanced way than we usually do in projects. And so for me, it just made it much more manageable, you know, because it wasn't so much as finding the perfect way to do this, but like trying things out and also rehearsing a lot. And you know, that's the same thing, like putting something in an online space is quite similar to putting it in a physical space. You would not put something in a physical space without rehearsing, right? I mean, the performers would rehearse, the production team would come within the space like early before the event and set up everything that needs to be set up. So yeah, and overviewing like an online project was quite similar for me. And I mean, I'd like to maybe bring another perspective on digital as well, because I feel like it's a sector of cultural production that, in a way, has been the main focus in the past year, because that was the main space available for culture to happen. But then at the same time, it has received much more scrutiny than any other ways of producing culture in the past. And, you know, it's a quite recent way to do things, right? So I think there needs to be some space given to these way of producing and of using resources before going entirely against it. And especially I've seen how digital, in our case, enabled us to reach much younger audiences than in the past. Our programs tend to appeal much more to, like, you know, a segment of 30 years old practicing musicians, a segment of 50 to 60 years old classical electronic music fans, and very few young people. So in digital and in digital space, for me, there's the capacity of reconnecting to this youth that has been largely absent from cultural debates in the past
Okay.
18 months because not necessarily producing themselves.
Thank you for that. We got to move on. We could talk about digital all night, as you can probably tell. But I want to turn to Lore and to hear a little bit about your Diaphonique project and the piece that we're going to hear in a few minutes called Escape from Plague Island. Where did you have in mind with Escape from Plague Island?
I can't think. Where could Plague Island be? I have no idea. Where on this planet at the moment? I'm lucky enough, or rather my project is lucky enough to be a laureate of the Diaphonique 2021. And the project is called FRUKU. And it really takes the whole Anglo-Franco collaboration to its limit because we have two composers from England. Well, one composer and one whatever I am, and two composers from France. And they all occupy a very particular place in music. So one of the English composers is called Trevor Wishart, and he is a great... He sort of underpins a lot of electroacoustic music in this country, but he's slightly under the radar. Not everybody really knows who he is. But he's a very, very... his ideas and the things he's researched in his music are very important in terms of researching space, for instance, and architecture, all these different things. He's quite a brilliant composer. And his counterpart is Denis Defoe, a French composer, also very important, very influential, also very under the radar. And these two composers, their pieces, Trevor Wishart's piece is The Garden of Earthly Delights, which got its world premiere this year and will get the UK premiere and French premiere, in fact, as a result of the Diaphonique project. And Denis Defoe, his projects are going to actually be complete world premieres. And he actually has a 16 CD coffret out on the Kairos label, which is very, very exciting. And I really recommend you get hold of that coffret because it's full of really wonderful pieces. And then you have Frédéric Acquaviva, who is a French composer, but living in England, in London. And it's interesting what you said about communal equipment, because his piece, in Antipodes, he actually wrote that in the EMS studio in Stockholm. And that is effectively what the EMS studio in Stockholm is. It is available to every single Swedish citizen. It's really a public studio. So what's wonderful about that is that you get all kinds of music being made there, and you can get the key, you can go in at midnight on Christmas Day, you can do what you like. It's really quite special. And I think this is something that could be a model for every single country in the world. So his piece, Antipodes, won the Carl Zucker Prize 2020 and got its Donau Eschingen performance this year because, of course, Donau Eschingen didn't really happen in 2020 because of the pandemic. And then my piece, which is the Voice Party Opera Bot Farm, and the section you will hear is called Escape from Plague Island. This piece was written, it wasn't really written actually, it kind of evolved, and I'm going to contradict myself horribly here about digital because I actually, having spent the last half hour, whatever, saying how horrible it is, I spent the lockdown learning how to code, and I learnt, I got this Twitter developer account, and I got so angry with Boris Johnson that I created a Twitter bot to troll him, basically. And so they're operatic bots that every time he tweets something, the bot comes up with something really, really kind of like either advice or a joke or insulting or something. And the Voice Party Opera Bot Farm is a sort of medley of these different tweets, which was then, I suppose, commissioned, for want of a better word, by Deutschland Kultur Radio and O1. And yeah, so I mean, it's all about listening, really. I mean, so another aspect of this project, which is worth noting is the idea that because of Brexit, these initiatives are even more important than when they began. They are even more important than when they began. And one thing that we're very much hoping is that there'll be a legacy from this project, which is a kind of twinning between the town of York, because it's involving York University, and they are basically basing an entire music festival around this Diaphonique project, and Cité de la Musique Marseille. So the idea is that there should be a continuing dialogue between these cities, which is going to be really essential, that we have a relationship between our two countries that isn't always about fish. and so, yeah, I feel very, very strongly about it. And one of the things that the Voice Party Opera Bot Farm came out of, in 2017, I began a political party called the Voice Party, which is not really a political party, it's an opera and a political party, but it's kind of, you don't really know if it's music or not, because it sits in the very pores of society, and it just kind of like exists and draws everyone in or not. It's the only party you can't join, it joins you. And I stood in the election with the Voice Party in 2019, and the entire campaign was done in song, in not song, but kind of vocalizations other than speech. And we will stand also in the next election, but there won't. I stood in Hackney North and Stoke Newington constituency, but we'll have York, Cornwall, and Hackney North and Stoke Newington. So it kind of turned the entire election into an opera, really. The idea is that music would be put right at the centre of British politics. So at the moment in England, everyone is, well, the English are, it's embarrassing how culturally illiterate they are, really. And it's not their fault, it's just in the education or lack of it thereof. And so music would be right in the middle of the education system, and everything would be based around music and culture, as opposed, at the moment, it sort of cringes on the sidelines, and we always have to apologise for asking for funding for things, or apologise even that it exists. And I really wanted to do so. It's kind of a political party, it's a pressure group. So that's what my piece particularly is. And it has impact on the whole project. Yeah.
Great. Shall we hear it?
Why not? It's horrible listening to my own piece with company. I'm going to kill myself now, but never mind. Hello, ja, grüß Gott, ja. I live in Vienna. No, ich wohne in Wien. Wirklich, ich wohne in Wien. Yeah, ich weiß, I know it's a British passport, but honestly I live in Vienna. I live here. No, really, I live here. I've got a Meldezettel, I mean, it's from 2003. It's like
wherever they are. Ping pong.
It's just on the UI. It's really. I can take you there if you want.
Which was that one Crouton.
Cannot send me back. It's not an option. wohne in Wien. This is my home. I
Never
live
the field
here.
team coaches are much better about so many to say few.
Ich bin eine
Never the
Wienerin.
field team coaches are much better about so many to say
I'm
few.
sorry, my German's really shit. I promise I'll improve it.
Whether race
or
gender or LGBT, ping pong.
No, really, I really, I've got a
Much better about so many to say few.
2003, it's like I've had it for ages. I've got I know it's a British passport, but it's I still live here. Like I live here. I've got a British passport.
But Brussels refuses any further to negotiate. Ping pong.
The 22nd district. I mean, it's really.
To repeat unequivocally, I guarantee. Ping pong. For the 3.2 million EU nationals. That we will fix the crisis in social care once and for all. Ping pong. Ping pong. Ping pong.
I'm sorry, my German's really shit. I promise I'll improve it. God, it's just don't send me back. I know it's a British passport. There's plenty of time on it. I live in Vienna. Yeah, here's my corona test. It's negative. Yeah, 2 days ago, it's completely negative.
That are incarnated in that red, white and blue flag.
Yeah, of course I'll quarantine. You can't send... You can't send me back. No, I live here. I live in Vienna. Ich wohne in Wien. Ich wohne in Wien. Ich wohne in Wien. Ich bin eine Wienerin. Ich wohne in Wien. I live here. I live in Vienna. I live in Vienna. Look, it says on the medal, it's the 22nd district. It's just on the U1. Yeah? You can come with me if you like. Honestly, I've got a cup of coffee or something. No, I live here. Seriously.
Give strong leadership to change this country for the better.
No, this is just not an option. I live here. This is my home. Yeah? Okay. You're born in Wien. Do you understand? Sorry, I know my German's really bad. Oh God,
Ping pong.
Ich wohne in Wien, wirklich. Ich wohne in Wien. I live here. I live in Vienna. I live in Vienna. Ich wohne in Wien. Ich habe eine Meldung.
That I've been somehow inconsistent.
Yeah, I mean, it's 2003. It's like really, my passport is 4 years. I know it's a British passport. I know.
To recover our natural and historic role.
Oh God,
as
I know
an enterprise, outward-looking.
But we're in the EU for just one more day. Come on, just give me a break. No, sorry. I didn't mean to be sorry. Look, I know we probably had a really hard day. Look, do you want some chocolate?
We will need to get ready at some point in the near future.
I'm not. It's not allowed anymore. Really? No, come on. Look, you cannot send me back. You just can't. Please don't send. No. What? No, I'll quarantine here, right here if you want. I'll just stay here for like 2 weeks in this very spot. I promise I won't move. I'm literally begging you here. You cannot send me back. It's just not possible to go back. It's just completely insane in that country. And now if I go back, I don't know what I'm a really shitty hotel room.
Got off this back. They're now British fish, and they're better and happier fish for it.
Land ohne Musik. It's just impossible. There's nothing there. There's nothing there for musicians. It's just hopeless. It's just like completely.
Got off this back. They're now British fish, and they're better and happier fish for
In
it.
meinem Land reden sie nur über Fisch. Ich weiß es nicht warum. Sie sind alle verrückt geworden. Jetzt sind alle verärgert, weil die Hummer verrotten.
Wow. I think all I can think to say is vote Laurie at the next election. Quite a remarkable piece of work. Eh? Actually, I'd like, if I may, go on to Pascal's video because I think that then we want to come back to some of the themes about the importance of international cooperation, of movement, of artists, about Brexit, what that means. And I think, you know, Pascal is an artist who's been based in the UK, a French artist based here for a number of years, and has developed a particular relationship with Eclectic, a venue in London, which we'll see in the video. So I think it would be good to see that, and then to talk about some of the themes that are impacting in all of us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is Christian Duca, and what you're seeing is You Are Human Presence, a performance driven by immersive sound that literally changed my life. Because of what happened on that day, I founded Amenus, an art organization that supports the development of immersive audio in the arts. You may have heard about 3D sound already in relation to VR or cinema. Instead, Amenus focuses on the use of 3D sound in live art and performances. When sound is sculpted in 3 dimensions, it becomes like a reality in itself that you can walk through and be surrounded by. In a scenario of this kind, there is no separation between artists and audiences. Everyone experiences the event from within. This creates inclusive, visceral somatic experiences that may have deeper psychological impacts and transformative effects on everyone involved. What you're about to see is a series of research and development projects, curated by Amenus in collaboration with Eclectic Art Lab here in London. We built an enveloping 13.4 speaker system, set up all the necessary technology, and invited various artists to experiment with it. They came to test how immersive sound can be used and what benefits it can bring to their practice. The results of these were shared with an audience in Eclectic's beautiful space.
Wow, there's a lot to come back to. I mean, Laurie, you speak so passionately, emotionally, angrily about the issues that we're facing as artists in the UK and Europe in terms of coming to the UK with the tremendous act of self-harm that is Brexit, in my opinion. And that's poured into that work, which is an incredible work. It's incredibly powerful. And also you're an artist who, I mean, I've known you for a great number of years. And when someone says, where is Lore Lixenberg based? I'm never quite sure. Because, you know, in terms of that mobility of artists and moving around and the ability to take your work to different countries, different cities, different environments, you know, you completely encompass that. What does Brexit mean for you? What are your real fears, concerns? Where do we go from here in relation to making sure, as we said, that it's more important now than ever that we have this cooperation between the UK and European neighbours?
Well, I think the cultural sector and the relationships we build and maintain have even more importance and resonance now. I think they are even more vital than before. They were always important. But when England was in the EU, you know, I understand now how much personally I took it for granted. I mean, those links were, that had a system behind them that supported them. It's interesting that you were at Eclectic, because I also have a history with Eclectic, and this kind of encapsulates a little bit of my life and how it's affected by Brexit. Because with composer Frédéric Acquaviva, we began a venue in Berlin called La Plaque Tournante. And one of the wonderful things initiated by Frédéric was a magazine called Crew Magazine that was what happened or what could have happened at La Plaque Tournante. And it's just a fantastic hybrid magazine in the shape of vinyl with posters of all the exhibitions. So you could effectively have a whole exhibition on your wall. We did several launches. The launch we did in England was at Eclectic, and they've supported Crew Magazine. So it's a French composer, an English whatever, based in Berlin, launching something in England. And this was all before, I mean, this happened after the referendum, but the systems were still in place. The full horror of the Brexit hadn't quite got in yet. So it's horrible. And as we were saying before we began actually speaking, was that for me, it's not just a split in terms of communities in this country, but it's a split inside me, because I now have to decide, am I English or am I European? And Europe is really winning, I'm afraid. You know, why would you want to be in an island that wants to surround itself with sewage, where that's somehow legal, and that people, it's like with the cloud, people not joining the dots. They don't understand that the reason we have these nice, clean beaches was an EU initiative, and that now the EU sewage treatment facilities are not being used anymore. That's why we suddenly have this problem. Why do we suddenly have this problem? This is the reason, and it's, I think, what really I find most difficult, and why I wanted to start a political party that was an opera, where people would engage with their creativity and musicianship and in a musician, is because, you know, we didn't get this via a coup. It wasn't a putsch. They voted for this. They voted for Boris Johnson. Okay, you could argue that we have a really terrible voting system which enables people like him, because it's basically a two-party system, first past the post. But there it is, and those people will vote for him again. And this mindset, this English mindset, I can't get my head around it. It's this amazing act of self-harm for something called sovereignty that, I mean, you know, for things that they had anyway. I'm speechless. I mean, I went through various stages of denial, anger, all those sort of things. And now I'm just sad and I've left. That's it. And I'm extremely grateful to European people who stay.
Or who arrive, like Solen. You arrived in the UK when?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I came to London about 4 years ago now, so that was after Brexit had been announced. And I mean, I've created a lot of work here, and I found a very creative ground. And, you know, if anything, music in the UK is still incredible. It's just like world-class artists producing. It does not have the support that it deserves. It does not have as much ties into countries next to it as it deserves, and musicians are cut off from each other. And you know, the Musicians Union gathered quite a lot of information from its members during the pandemic, but the one thing that came up each time was just the lack of cooperation being the main barriers for artists to be able to create. And this context is, extremely damaging.
Just a thought in that. My theory about why great art thrives in the UK, just despite the lack of funding, is that, you know, it doesn't really matter which political party has been in power in the UK over the years. The truth is, none of them really like to give money to the art or artists. And the strength in that, I suppose, is if you don't give something very much, there's never very much you can take away. So some European countries can be quite volatile in different periods in the arts, because sometimes they can be well-funded and sometimes not so well-funded. And I'm thinking about Netherlands, for example, that's went through quite a change in its funding in the last 10 years. In the UK, it tends to be quite stable, because the truth is there is no political party that likes to really give too much to artists. So hold on to that thought, because I want to... Pascal has been in the UK for a good number of years.
Yeah, 20 years now.
Yeah, so for you, you know, Brexit and post-Brexit, have things changed for you? What's your thoughts and feelings on it?
So first of all, I want to say that thank you for your piece, because it made me relieve my anger against Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg when I see them. And
that's one of the milder pieces.
I had a very physical reaction to it, so I think it's a success, this piece. Thank you for that. So I arrived in London 2001, obviously in the Blair years, so a very different country. And what question was, what Brexit changed for me? I think it came before that. When I arrived in this country, I was not very political, not very interested in all that, more into the music and going to parties, things like that. But living through Cameron years, got into paying attention to what was being done to this country and being very passionate about all that. So it transformed me into someone super interested in politics, and that kind of informed also the creative practice, because I made in 2018, but I started way before that, an album called Dislocations that was themes around the dislocation of society in the UK, and I could see what was happening around me, around us and as countries. And then my next album as well is informed by everything that's happened since then. It's called Simulacra, so it's around it's based on the book by Baudrillard called Simulacra and Simulations, and around how power is just a facade for something much more sinister. In part, it's not just about that. And then when I see those people you featured in your piece, it's like theatrics, it's like a pantomime, but behind all that, there is a very sinister kind of things happening, and that's something that, for me, informed the creative process. And I think 12 years ago, my music was much more mellow, more into the ambient. You said in the introduction, intersection of noise and ambient and drones, and started with ambient, and then the politics made me much more exploring the noise realm of music, and then in a way it kind of, informing all the time the creative process, like you in the different means. But that was changed for me. In terms of touring and things like that you mentioned, just before the pandemic, we were meant to go with the eclectic, some of the eclectic people and artists to Barcelona for kind of a Barcelona-London kind of exchange with the label Touch. It was all happening. The pandemic put a stop to it, but now Brexit has happened for real. So what are the financial implications of putting a show in Barcelona? You know, you have all the paying for importing your equipment in Europe, and that's a very different thing. And finish by saying that the irony with Brexit is like people like me who've lived in this country and made a home in this country for a very long time, we've got this so-called settled status, which means that we've got more rights than English people, because we can live here with the same right as English people, but we can live in Europe, travel in Europe very differently. So that's the irony, I think, of this whole thing.
Yes, I was going to say that if you have anyone with only an English passport that wants to go to Spain, Spain is one of them, because another thing that people don't seem to get is that they say, oh, everyone's against England and blah, blah, blah. And they're not. It's just now we are a third country and we have different rules for each country. The third country rules apply to us. That's it. Bam. We're not exceptional. We are just another third country. So the third country rules for people working in Spain are particularly harsh. In some other EU countries, they're not so harsh. By the way, I have a fantastic contact if you need some help with car nets and stuff. This guy and sponsors someone called Ian Smith, who is just amazing. He's like biblical in his knowledge of these matters. But yeah, it's Spain and Portugal are particularly hard.
Yeah, we probably, I don't know if Anna at the back is signalling to me that we should wind up shortly. Are we okay for another 10 minutes? Yep. Because I wanted to move on to talk about the concert tonight a little bit, Pascal, and find out what we are going to listen to later. And you told me earlier that it was a little bit out of your comfort zone, which I think is particularly exciting. Yeah. So tell me about your comfort zone and why this concert is out of it.
So, my comfort zone is doing what you've seen on the film, working with feedback and then doing, using sound as a kind of, almost like a fabric or texture, trying to paint with sound. So that's, my practice is all about that with different processes in a way. When Anna approached me for this project 6 months ago. She mentioned something about branching or linking classical music with electronics. And for me, it was, as you said, out of my comfort zone and of my knowledge as well. So I thought that's interesting. And she put me in contact with 2 classical instrumentists and then say, oh, you can do whatever you want. With one prerequisite is that you don't want to scare the audience too much. So, but that's a very interesting point actually, because it's every time I perform my own music, I try to. It's not just self-indulgent in a way of this is my music, and it's in a way of having an audience around us, as you said. It's sharing a space with someone else, even if it's a very small audience, and then experiencing sound and ideas together. So coming back to tonight, not scaring an audience is, you can read that in different ways. You can either being very conservative and try to do what you think you're expected to do, or you can take people by the hand and then lead them to a different place that maybe don't know. So that's why I was interested in that. So, and that led to how we constructed the program, which is a combination of classical pieces. So there is the opening pieces by Bach, and then mixing that with my own composition, but which I've kind of streamlined quite a lot to leave a lot of space to improvisation. And I know those wonderful musicians, they really impressive and they're classically trained. But I also wanted to push them into the realm of improv, because that's what I've been doing for many years. So it's just this communication. For me, the real challenge was how to bring electronic music, for lack of a better word, into a classical piece that's been written for instrument, and that's very dynamic in his movement, in his harmonic shifts. You can improvise with that, but so if you don't want to scare your audience, you have to do it in a very mellow way. So I think I've chosen this path of not being too heavy on the classical piece, but also taking the audience by the hand and bringing them into my own sonic world, and then mixing the two and see what happens.
It sounds absolutely fascinating. The great American saxophonist Roland Kirk, way back in the very early 60s, when not too many black artists appeared on mainstream TV, and certainly not jazz artists, managed to get a slot on a show where they asked them to not scare the audience. And they asked them to play a jazz standard, a ballad. So we got together people like Archie Shepp and Marion Brown and lots of real hardcore free jazzers, and they played one verse of the jazz standard, and then they launched into 35 minutes of hardcore free improvisation, screaming through saxophones. And you can see a clip on YouTube for the producers of the show are actually trying to usher them off the stage, and Roland Kirk's getting ushered off the platform, still screaming away and wailing away. He played 3 saxophones at once, or 3 instruments at once. So it was a very powerful experience. So I don't know if I'm encouraging you to up that improvisation and scare the audience a little bit tonight, maybe. I'll get the blame afterwards from Anna if the audience are scared. But sorry, Anna. I think we're probably coming to the end of the time and the talk. I think, what's been really interesting tonight and where we've ended up in the conversation really is just how important initiatives like Diaphonique are, and that are promoting collaboration between the UK and France, and artists in the UK and France, and festivals in the UK and France. And I think it's so important, and it's produced so many wonderful, lasting collaborations over the years that have resulted in real legacies coming from those projects. So I would finish by saying thank you to everyone involved in Diaphonique, and may it continue for many, many years. In the face of everything we're going through at the moment in promoting that collaboration. My thanks to Lore, to Solen, and to Pascal for their contributions this evening. My thanks to you for coming. My thanks to the public online when they join us for this discussion. My thanks to Anna and the Institute, the whole team here who organised the event. And my thanks to the French Embassy for the support and promotion of French culture and new music in the UK. The next round of Diaphonique, the Fund for Contemporary Music, has its call for applications open from mid-March until mid-May, and you can find out more information on the website diaphonique.org. Thank you very much, and please join me just in thanking our panellists. Thank you.